Hello and welcome to Dream, Declare, Deliver. I'm your host, Chris Carell, and I'm welcoming you to a new segment of the program. The first 13 sessions that we had were on the book Typhoon Honey, The Only Way Out Is Through. And my co-author, Candace Sogren, and I were exploring different tips and techniques that you can use to build a life worth living, a life by design, as we called it. And I'm turning the corner now to shift to a new book that I just released called Learning to Feel. And I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the distinctions that are used in the book, and then go into exploring what we can access through our emotional states and through what information is available to us in emotions. So to start off, I'd like to make a couple distinctions, and that is between thoughts and emotions. A lot of people will say, well, I don't feel like doing that. I don't feel like going to the gym today. I don't feel like getting up. I don't feel, whatever that is. That is not an emotion. That's actually a thought. And in fact, many of our emotions, most of our emotions, are preceded by thoughts. Our brain manufactures the emotion based on our beliefs and our thought systems. And it's been proven recently through brain science research, some of which is being done right here in Boston, that the entire system, the whole brain lights up when we're having an emotional experience. And what that means is that we're getting information from all parts of our body, literally our brain stem and our central nervous system, our heart, as well as all segments of the brain. So we used to believe, for example, that emotions were seated only in the amygdala, in what's called the cerebellum, and that second part of the brain, and that was where emotions lived exclusively. What we're finding is that while there is functioning there and there is stuff that's triggered there, but it's also tapping into all of the memories and thoughts that we have that create meaning in our life. So, for example, when we experience something and have an emotional reaction from it, like, for example, we see a car crash and we have a flash of panic. What's happening is the thing that our brain is always doing, which is it experiences something, it sees something, perceives something, brings it in through the senses, through our five senses, and maybe some others, and then it checks that out against the memory banks that it has about what those experiences might be, what looked like that, felt like that, sound like that before, and then projects that into the next moment. It projects it into the next moment or the future moments or way out in the future. Oh my God, this is going to be like that forever. And it all does that in light speed, so fast that we don't even perceive it. So it looks like and it feels like we see something or experience something and end up, having an emotion right about that. In fact, what's happening is that referring system, the brain sees, refers to its back, and then projects, is always going on. The brain is busy all day long, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, from before our birth until the flat line when we die. Um, and our brain is always doing that. It's monitoring all of our autonomic systems, our breathing, our heart rate, our stomach indigestion or digestion, our intestines, our leg, the tension in our muscles. It monitors all that imperceptibly. We're not aware of that. If we were aware of all the things the brain were thinking of and analyzing all the time, we'd probably go wacky. But what that does is that's all happening at a preconscious or an unconscious level, and then at the same time, it's making a projection. Lisa Feldman Barrett, a researcher at Northeastern University, as a brain scientist, uses the example of how that comparison and projection works. Imagine yourself walking on one of those moving conveyor belts at the airport. Now, your brain knows that you're walking on a moving floor and that you're moving at a speed faster than the people that are beside you who are walking on the regular floor. And so it knows that it projects into the future that when you come to the end of the moving sidewalk, that you'll have to adjust your pace because you're going a little faster. However, we always make an error in that judgment, in that I know I do. When I get to the end, even though I know I'm going to have to quicken my pace to not fall over, I still stumble a little bit, with that transition from the moving sidewalk to the still sidewalk. And so what's happening is that we have these errors of judgment, even though that's the job of the brain and it's doing it all the time. So, so I'm kind of, getting into the deep details right away, but the point is that our brain's job is to analyze things and project into it. And that's the source of our emotions. When we don't have access to our emotions, the whole reason why I wrote Learning to Feel was to understand the connection between those thoughts and beliefs and the projected emotions that result from them. So that, and see how they were acting in my life and causing me to act certain ways that I wasn't really fully aware of. I just work on automatic pilot. Many of us, and you may be like me, run at such a high speed that we're not really aware of what's going on in our minds, and we just, we just move through one thing to the next thing, and we often are in what I call reaction mode. We're not in action. I always think of myself as an action-oriented person. You may think of yourself that way too, but in truth, we're always in reaction. 99.9%, I don't know, that's not a real number, but most of the time, what we're doing is not an action, but a reaction to the cues that are around us. If you're relating to what I'm saying and smiling and nodding, you're having a reaction to what my words are and what I'm saying. You go outside, it's a beautiful spring day here in New England today, and I'm dying to get outside. And as soon as I go outside, my reaction is going to be sunny skies, 80 degrees in April. How blessed we are! How wonderful that is! So I'm reacting to the nature. I'm reacting to the weather. On gloomy days, don't you wake up sometimes and you say, "Oh, I just want to roll over and go back to sleep or something," because it's gray and, and and cold and gloomy outside. So we have to understand that because we're always in reaction, we have to understand what we are in reaction to. Our emotions, therefore, are huge signs, huge billboards that say, this is what's going on here. This is what you think, this is what you believe, this is what's going on. So if we pay attention to our emotions, we have much better chance of understanding what our antecedent beliefs and thoughts are. And if we do that, then we can change our thoughts. The lovely thing about being Homo sapiens sapiens, which is now our designations, we're no longer called hominids, we're no longer called Homo sapiens, we're called Homo sapiens sapiens. We can think about thinking. We actually do that. So what we can do when we access our emotions is get access to the antecedent belief systems and the thought systems, and then we can challenge those. I'll give you a real example of that I used in the book. I'm a large guy. I'm 6'3" and 2 1/4. And I've always been pretty big, but I wasn't when I was a little kid. And way back in, I don't know, 1953 or so, somewhere in that territory, I was 4 years old. We were living on an army barracks in Germany as part of the Army of Occupation post World War II. And I was about 4 years old, as I said, and there weren't playgrounds there. The kids all just played out on the stoop outside the building, on the steps or on the sidewalks or things like that. One particular day, I was out there playing with a truck or something that was really cool. And the other kids wanted me to share it, and I didn't want to share. And they started calling me stingy, and they started calling me names and stuff like that. And I got mad. I got really really mad as a 4-year-old little boy could get. And so as you looked out down the steps, I was up on the stoop, and there are 3 steps down to the sidewalks where the other children were. On the sides were these brick, kind of a little baluster about this high, going down the side, made out of bricks. On the side on the right, there was a loose brick, a half brick that was loose. In my rage, I bent over, picked up that brick, and I threw it at the other kids, and it hit one of the boys on the side of the head, and it started bleeding profusely. I got scared. I ran inside, hid under the table, and cried. I just was scared to death. Period. End of sentence. That's an experience that's in my brain. What I learned out of that was I'm a mean person. I'm a violent person. I can cause harm to other people. And that lived inside of me for a long, 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 long time, until somewhere, I don't know, maybe about 35 years ago, I was in a workshop. And in the workshop, we were talking about how we have these belief systems that are inside of us. And if we want to take control of our lives, we really need to know what those belief systems are. We need to challenge them. Are they real? So we went through this exercise to, unearth what are some of those fundamental life-changing beliefs that you adopted, in your childhood. And I told the story of the brick. So the instructor said, tonight I want you to go home and check it out. See if you can find out, did that really happen or did it not happen, or what's up with that? So after the workshop was over, I went home and I called my sister, who was 2 years older than me. And, when we were over in Germany, she was like my Lord and protector. She was with me all the time. So I said, Sue, told the story about the brick. Do you remember this incident? And she said, well, I remember when you went inside and you were under the table hiding and crying, but I don't remember anything about a brick or anything like that. Why don't you ask Mom? So my mom was still alive at that time. And so I called her up and I told her the same story, asked her the same question. And she said, Chris, you got to understand this. We lived in an army barracks. All the mothers were hardwired together. If anything like that had even closely resembling that had happened, I would have known immediately. That never happened. That never happened. I have such a visual memory in my head of that happening. But what really happened then was that in my anger as a 4-year-old little boy, I dreamed, or I thought that I would pick up a brick. I couldn't possibly have the acuity or the strength to throw a brick and actually hit somebody. I never did that. But I believed I did. I wanted to do that. And that lived as a memory in my head. And that was the foundation of a lot of the ways that I reacted to people, a lot of the ways that I engaged in sports, and was afraid to really hit hard in football and wrestling and stuff like that. It lived as a construct inside of me. And so what I mean by that story is once I learned that that was a made up story, then I could suddenly say, well, what really happened was this. And I can have a new history, a new story. And so that emotion that I usually have when I'm confronted with a situation that I'm big and mean and nasty and I could cause harm to people no longer exists, and I was freed from that myth that lived in my head. That's what's available to us when we're able to access the thoughts that precede the emotions. When we start taking, stock of what our feelings are, then we're able to say, okay, so that feeling comes from this thought. What must be the thought that I'm having? I'm in a situation. I do trainings, for example. It's called Alice training, and I train people on how to survive armed, shooter incidents, just like the ones we just had a couple this week. And they're horrifying to me, but I don't have the money to fight the NRA. I don't have a political interest in being a member of Congress and trying to pass legislation, but I do know how to teach. And so I teach how to survive these incidents. In order to teach those classes, I have to go and look at all the statistics, all the deaths that have happened through guns, through gun violence and mass shootings in the United States. And it's just horrific information. And it makes me sick to my stomach. And I get upset. Upset is one of those words that we use to talk about massive emotions that have multiple parts to it. My upsetness is I'm angry at the people who do this. I'm frustrated that I can't stop it. I am sad, deeply saddened for the families whose children are lost. Even when those children are adults, they were once somebody's child. And so I'm sad for those families and their loss. And I worry about my own family, my own children, my own adult children who are out there in the world, because these events happen everywhere. So all those things are packed into my upset. And so once I look at those different feelings and unpack that, then I get to look at what's the thought before that. And the thought is, what if that happens to me? What if that happens to my daughters or my son? How do I stop that? Do I feel helpless? I'm feeling helpless in that situation. What is it that I feel helpless? And what's that thought that is causing me to think that I am helpless in this? And once I get a hold of those thoughts, then I can take action. What I can take action on is I can reprogram that. I can say, here's what I'm doing to stop it. This is what I'm doing to educate people. This is what I'm doing to make sure my family all knows what to do and how to stay safe in an active shooter situation. I'm now in action because I've looked at what the feelings were and what the thoughts were that were causing those feelings. By taking action, I reduce that emotion. I reduce that pain, that horror, that nausea, the fears. I reduce those because I've taken an action in response to the thoughts that were there beforehand. So learning how to feel is a process of getting access to our emotions so that we can get access to the thoughts so that we can then have greater control in our life. A lot of people fear getting access to their emotions because they think it'll make them more emotional. They'll become ruled by their emotions. And just the opposite is true. What happens is you get access to the thoughts that can give you more control over your life and better able to react in those things. Now, let's talk about a couple scenarios about why I wrote Learning to Feel. The first and foremost is all of us today are beaten into submission by violence, terrorism, what we're just talking about, the gun violence and things like that, by horrors, things that we hear on the news. It's just too tragic for most of us to handle. So our mind wants to block that out. We want to numb ourselves to it, and we either do that mentally or we do that through drugs and alcohol. We numb out ourselves so that we don't have to feel that intensity. And so a lot of us today are walking around really, either going la 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 with our hands over our ears, or actively trying to escape and not listen to the news and not look at it, not read the news columns. I don't want to see any of that anymore. It hurts too much to be alive and aware of those things. So one of the reasons I wrote Learning to Feel is so that we can deal more effectively with the numbing that has taken over our being. As the second part of that, as a man, as a man who grew up in the 50s, I was taught, pardon me, The glottal stop there. That's an emotional reaction, by the way. When you feel that glottal stop, when you try to say something, that's your body not wanting to say it because it feels it, it might have pain to it or something. As a man growing up in the 50s, I was taught not to feel. Big boys don't cry. You bury your feelings before you get on the football field because you don't want your feelings to get in the way of doing the right thing. The play that that you have to do. You have to pull right, pull left. Handle. Sorry, somebody's calling me. You have to handle what's in front of you rather than feeling the panic or the fear. Um, and so, we were taught not to feel. I had a coach once. I dislocated my little finger. It was actually sticking out sideways like that, and went over to the coach, and he popped it back into place, and he says, spit on it and rub it in the dirt. You'll be better before you're married. And we weren't allowed to feel the pain of that. Just get back out on the field and do your job. And so all of that kind of programming for men, a lot of men growing up learned that they weren't allowed to feel. I think this newest generation that's now reaching adulthood, whatever letter they are, A or Z or whatever, the young men that I see are much more attuned to their feelings than we were growing up. So I think this is much more of, if we're talking about men's issues with feelings, much more an older man, a middle age and above man's problem than it is a younger man's problem. However, we all are still beaten into submission and numbed out by the horrors and the things that are happening in our government and our country and things like that. So it's important for us from those two perspectives to learn how to feel. So the book was actually written as a journey of my own to rediscover some of those things so that I could, deal with the masculine programming that I had growing up, as well as I could deal with, what's going on today that would want me not to feel as well. So the other thing I wanted to lay out in this initial recording is the things that I'm not talking about when I'm talking about learning to feel. I am not talking about clinical depression. I'm not talking about manic depressive or any kind of clinical disorder, as part of what I deal with. That's not the same territory, and those often are chemical or other disturbances that happen in the mind and body that are beyond my scope. We're not really trying to fix something that is a disorder. I'm not trying to prescribe anything that you should do if you're in therapy or anything like that. Continue with that. I'm just really talking about normal everyday feelings that we all have. So it's not something to dig into that I want to dig into very much at all. There will be times, there are times when we get into a funk as normal people, people who, and I'm not saying that people who have emotional problems are abnormal. What I'm saying is that in everyday existence of being a human, sometimes we get into a funk. We just we're down for some reason. And what we get to do with that is we get to unpack it. When I wrote Learning to Feel, it's a different kind of book than I've ever written before. I typically write as a subject matter expert on things that I know about. So I write about transformation. I write about spirituality. I write about the dark night of the soul or things like that. Because I've studied them and I know something about them. In Learning to Feel, I wrote a lot about myself and what I was going through in this journey of trying to recover my emotional being. And so when I submitted the book, when the manuscript was finally complete, and the book came back as what's called an advanced review copy, which I still have. Um, Looks like this. It's a beautiful cover and everything, and it will be available in August. But you get these copies to send out to the review companies, the people who critique your writing. I sent out 10 copies that day, and the next day I woke up in a depression. I felt scared. I felt, oh my God, what have I done? People are going to know my innards. They're going to know, something about me that I've never shared publicly before. And I just was in a funk. There was no other way to describe it. In that situation, I actually knew what was happening. I figured it out after the first day, and I said, "Oh, this is what's happening." I let myself be there for another day, and then I started, looking at what are the thoughts. What am I really thinking about? Am I afraid that they're going to critique my writing? They're gonna say, this buffoon. Who wants to know about Chris Carell's life anyway? I had all those thoughts that were in there. And so I got to start looking at how to replace those thoughts. And brought me out of the funk pretty quickly. So, we do experience those times of ups and downs, and it's important for us to allow the downs to happen, because if we hammer those flat, what we do is we also flatten the highs. So I also want to talk about great experiences, love and peace and joy and awe, tranquility, things like that that we feel, on a regular basis as well, and that we want to keep. Do I want to analyze the thought behind my joy? Do I want to analyze the thoughts behind my loving? Yeah, maybe. There might be some things that I can gain from that, that I can increase my joy, increase my loving. When I feel love for someone, which is an incredibly complex emotion. It's a bundle of whole bunches of other kinds of things, and we'll spend one whole session just on love, going forward. But when we experience that, and we're able to look at, well, what is it that I love about this person? What is it that I delight in? The theologian James Loder has this delightful definition of love, which he calls the unconditional delight in the particularities of another. I just enjoy that so much. The unconditional delight in the particularities of another person. That's what I feel when I'm in love. I just delight in everything about her. My wife Sarah is just, the joy of my life, and all of her idiosyncrasies and all of her qualities, good, bad, sideways, and others. I enjoy. I love. I delight in them, and that to me is the definition of what love is. So we'll get into love as we go along, but my goal here isn't to overanalyze those kinds of things, but rather to look at the ones that get in our way. When our emotions get in our way, what we need to do is really find out what's behind those emotions. So that's what this segment of Dream, Declare, Deliver is going to be all about. It's going to be all about learning to feel. And it's going to be a trip down several different emotional paths. We'll take on different emotions. I'm going to get a chance to interview some really cool people to join me on this quest, and get a chance to explore how to feel and what are the benefits of learning to feel. So thank you so much for joining me on this initial opening session of Learning to Feel, part of the Dream, Declare, Deliver series. I hope you join me each week for another session. and for some of the interviews and stories we get to tell about our emotional baggage and our emotional trips that we go through throughout our lives. Thanks again, and hope to see you next time.